Welcome to Open Source Health, the podcast that doesn't just talk about fixing healthcare, we're actively doing it. I'm Trip Johnson, CEO of the Advita Collective, and I'm here to take you on a behind the scenes journey as we build a technology forward, stakeholder centric healthcare company. Our mission? Bring transparency and innovation to an industry that desperately needs both. Join us as we dive into the intersections of policy, technology, and hands on healthcare, offering a rare glimpse into the challenges and triumphs of creating a system that works for everyone patients, providers, policymakers, payers, and technologists alike. We'll share our journey of building in the open, and we'll have candid conversations with our team and other like minded change makers who are as passionate as we are about revolutionizing healthcare. This is Open Source Health, where we don't just diagnose the problems, we roll up our sleeves and work on the solutions. Let's get started. Yo, do you have a collared shirt on? Like, what are you doing? Are you going to Cotillion today?
Yeah. I'm going to going to, what is it, the manners class or whatever you have to do in Cotillion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little ballroom dancing.
Little ballroom dancing. Yeah, a little 4 count, stay in the box.
Aren't you just supposed to go to like drum circles with smelly hippies in Asheville?
Yeah, they kicked me out.
Uh,
Yeah, I'm not crunchy enough.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah,
Oh,
probably no
well, how's the
surprise to
week?
anyone who knows me. Man, roller coaster. Uh, yeah, roller coaster week, I think. We ended the last podcast episode saying we were going to run our experiment with digital paid ads, see how that went. We've made this bet to bring everything in house, and last week we had 7 to 10 days of website traffic that kind of dipped in a way that we don't have the experience to kind of contextualize that, right? Like if we had like 5 years of website data dipping every year at that time, then we say, hey, this is just a seasonal anomaly. We chalk it up to that. But I'll say for myself, it created quite a bit of panic and discomfort. So, yeah, I mean, it was an interesting sort of week, and then only to kind of watch all the traffic rebound much higher than it's previously been, and then to see that coincide with an increase in sort of online digital leads and form fills and all that sort of stuff coming in from our various lines of service. So these things are, I think, kind of fascinating lessons that we could take. But we told all dear 12 listeners that we would report back on how some of those paid ads went and what our experience was with that. So I figured that's a good kickoff point.
Yeah, well, as far as the paid ads go, I definitely we ran two sets of ads, one in Chapel Hill and one in Raleigh. I don't really know what we learned from it, but we did get, what I'll say is like we just ran some like basic like these are the services we provide ads.
Yeah.
And they weren't really tailored to someone who's like seeking treatment for depression or this or that.
Right.
But we did get a lot of clicks. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a good, like, again, this is just being our first set. So as I look at it right now, in Chapel Hill, our cost per click to the website was like $2.22. Whereas in Raleigh, it was 88 cents. And a lot of that's just due to, the number of people
Right.
that are there. But I thought that was, pretty interesting. And I think, we've got like the number of impressions and the reach. And so I think now we have a first baseline, just to iterate from there.
Yeah. And I think that's the process of all of this stuff, right? Is iteration. And when we made this bet to bring digital marketing in house, this was largely, a drive from us internally. I think for how do we bring all the metrics and data in house? How do we build institutional knowledge? How do we do this so that we can make the cost of treatment, lower the cost of treatment, lower the cost of ops, and all that sort of stuff? And marketing and you can have the best product in the world, but if no one knows about it, right, like it doesn't matter, right? You have to have people engaging with that. And so we feel like we have a really good propositional value, that we have really good service that we offer. but you still have to find a way of getting that in front of people. And so our big bet here has been, we want to do this internally, and we're going to take our lumps along the way. And we think that digital really is the way to sort of do that. And so I think this week was a really, at least for me, was like a real kind of inflection point testing that thesis, right? It was the first time it's been, I think, really, really pressure tested in some sort of way. And so,
Yeah. So can I try and recap this and then tell me where,
yeah, for sure,
where
please.
you went with it? So we got a new website a month or so ago. It was better than our old website in the sense that it was just constructed in a more optimized way. And I think we cleaned up, we made it look prettier and whatnot, but not a ton of substantive changes.
Yeah.
And then we saw a pop in traffic, like because of the better readability of the website, like we saw the traffic go up. But then as Google like crawled our pages, it found out there was a lot of problems when we transferred the old website to the new website. And once those got registered, the traffic kind of plummeted. And thus like people are, not finding us online. And so our kind of leads and conversions were basically cut in half for a week at the same time that we're hiring people and expanding into Chapel Hill. And that's just not a comfortable trend. So then on Monday, it was like, we need to fix this now. And just because you have a general understanding of what needs to happen, I was like, look, I don't want to wait a couple months to see if we know what we're doing or you know what you're doing. And so we decided to get a few proposals from agencies. And I think I'll let you speak more to that. But to me, what was super interesting, kind of skipping ahead, is like the purpose of our reaching out to agencies was not to engage in a long agency relationship, but to kind of get some workforce augmentation and consulting. But these agencies just sent us the same cookie cutter stuff they would, if we were coming to them to outsource everything.
Yeah. And I think what was particularly interesting and a good exercise was looking at it and essentially seeing that the plan that they were proposing is already the stuff that we're doing. Which was like, it was nice in some ways, right? Like it was confirmation that, hey, we've made this bet. We're going to have to take our lumps along the way. We're going to learn. We're going to iterate. We're going to continue to improve things. But again, it was this cool. It's like all the proposals are $150,000 to $200,000 of digital marketing per year to different firms, which is, given our kind of scope and what we're looking for and the metrics that we're kind of trying to get to, that's going to be a pretty standard price range. And so, we've said it often, right? Like we don't want to spend that and outsource it to someone else. And I think what was interesting, at least for me with this, is we've had this big across the organization push into data, right? Like not just in digital marketing, but throughout ops and all this other sort of stuff. And so as I'm reviewing these prospectuses, I was able to look at them and say, oh, wow, this is interesting. Their data that they're presenting differs greatly from the data that I have and the data that I'm looking at. And so there's some sort of discrepancy here that no one ever really resolved in a way that made a lot of sense to me. So it was kind of nice to say, like, listen, I'm not willing to take this bet right now. And it seems like what you guys are telling us is that our strategy and internal plan for this is theoretically correct. And so we're just going to have to kind of ride through the storm a little bit. We've seen traffic and leads and everything kind of bump back up this week. And that's been a nice sort of, we had a perfect storm a week and a half ago with web traffic and leads dropping. Well, we have a new program, a new location we're trying to get off the ground. And then this week was sort of a perfect storm of things kind of coinciding or coming back together, right? Like website traffic goes back up and we're looking at, an increase in leads and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, this stuff is terrifying in a lot of ways. It's nerve-wracking. But again, being able to lean back into the data piece, is like we can make decisions, right? You can, and it is comfortable to be able to make data driven decisions. Like it's a tumultuous process sometimes to get to that data. And I think one of the things that I'm experiencing that's kind of interesting too, with especially all this digital marketing stuff, is like there's a million different data points, right? But they're always just approximations, and at some point in time, it turns into what total picture is this data that you're looking at presenting? But
Uh-huh.
like typically, I think the idea is you want to be able to have the right data, the right amount of data to be able to make more informed decisions. But at the end of the day, it's never going to be 100%, right? Like you're just playing in terms of probability. Like how can we increase the probability that we're correct, and by relying on the data that we do have and interpreting that.
And I think what was interesting, so the way, we structured and worked with our kind of marketing advisors was, we have our KPIs at the
Hmm.
leadership level, which are really just like how many leads did we have by line of service and how many conversions did we have by line of service. And then we have the KPIs at the departmental level, which break those down, add in prospects. So anyone who calls us or um, goes to the website but doesn't fill out a form.
Yeah,
Um, and then we track it by like phone versus website. And then we get into those operational metrics, is what we were really looking at and what were scaring us with, like the amount of web traffic, the amount
right.
of, whatever. Um, and then the goal is to increase the web traffic, which will then increase our prospects, which increases the leads, which increases the conversions. But what none of those proposals said, and this was like the thing that drove me crazy, was they didn't match what activities they were going to do to impact our
Right.
operational metrics, which will then, impact our real KPIs. And I found that like super interesting, because it's like they don't know. It's basically like they're going to make an educated guess too. And sure, they have information about what's going to work, but are we going to spend a month to onboard and go through discovery when it's like we already know who our audience is? Like we've done all of this work.
Yeah.
And it was really just a question, is like, can we get our shit together quick enough? And it
Yeah.
seems like we adapted really well. Like you found, what was it? Like the internal linking was like the major problem with
Yeah.
what was driving it. So it's like, hey, we have 400 broken links, and when you just start fixing those, everything goes in the right direction. And I
Yeah.
found that like interesting, because again, you just find the data you need. This is why we're not doing well. Fix
Mm.
those things, and then look for the next.
Right. And then it's chop wood and carry water forever, right? Like it's
Yeah.
always like that's what you just said is the crux of all of this, right? Is get data, use data, analyze the problem, use data to analyze the problem, fix the problem, and then repeat. And that'll
Yeah.
be what we essentially do as an organization forever.
And I think what's so different this time that's really cool is there was zero processing without data first, right? Like we
Yeah.
didn't just say, well, we're not sure what's going on. It was like, no, this is the report we're looking at. We've got these issues with the website, and we're just like, we're gonna start working on it. And
Yeah.
it wasn't a real discussion around like, well, whose fault is this? What's going on? It's like,
Right.
hey, here's the data tells us what problem to solve, and then we just need to solve that problem. We don't need to invent other problems or bring in, like, to me it just felt like I think we were each pretty stressed about it earlier this week, like stressed but also excited at the same
Yeah.
time, in a way that felt much more culturally appropriate for what we're trying to build.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think and that's an interesting like mental way to frame this sort of stuff. I think, right? Like, is if you can create enough distress tolerance in your system and in your model and your financial and business model, right? If you can create enough distress tolerance in that, then these things actually become learning opportunities, right? And what a freaking value to have that internally, to have this sort of rep of this behavior, right? And
Yeah.
that's a tremendous asset that will just pay exponential dividend, like exponentially down the road. So I find all of this stuff interesting when it starts humming together, right? Like your
Yeah.
operations, your marketing, your actual clinical practice, the idea of what best practice is. Um, and I think like you also had a really cool kind of breakthrough with some of the operations team uh, last night that I think all it really has like a golden thread that runs through all of this stuff. And I'd like you to kind of maybe break that down, and I can share why I think that maybe should, like, makes me hopeful and feel a little better as well too. But
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to flag is like there is this, as we've discussed ad infinitum, however you say that. That last time I try and use a word that I've only read out loud. Uh,
it's not the last time.
uh, the interesting thing to me about data in general, and abstracting out from kind of like our work, is there's so much time spent on like the interpretation piece, right? Like,
Mhm.
let's think about politically. We can look at two sets of facts and come away with two different sets of conclusions based on that.
Right. Yeah.
So much of the, I think, the art organizationally is looking for those places where we're going to look at the same facts and agree, right?
Mhm.
Like, no one thinks that their expectation for utilization is wrong, but sometimes it feels busier than it should be.
Yeah.
So there's often this, like, if we wanted to think about it as like political parties, right? Like, you've got one side being, clinical and medical, and you've got another side that's like admin, scheduling, you know,
Yeah.
the patient support. And a
Right.
lot of times, like, they kind of come into conflict over what gets put on the schedule. Did we collect all the documentation we needed?
Right.
And there's kind of like a little bit of finger pointing.
Yeah.
But then, so one of the things we've been looking at now that we have built out a lot of reports in Power BI is this idea of like caseload management, and
Mhm.
and how important that is at an outpatient level of care. Especially as you're bigger, you need these tools in order to make sure that we are delivering that kind of world-class care. And in order to deliver that, like, first we need to know who we're taking care of and how frequently we should be seeing them. And so one of the big things is like, for whatever reason, and I actually know, but like, a lot of medical appointments don't have, like, they're not set for recurring, because like
Yeah.
that's not necessarily how you practice medicine. It's not like you're in treatment where you're going to have an individual therapy session at the same time every week, or even outpatient
Mhm.
therapy where it's much more regimented. And it was actually yesterday that Dr. O'Connor explained some of that to me, and it all, like, okay, that just makes sense.
Mhm.
So there are a couple like key policies and procedures that we don't have right now, that everyone's kind of like doing their best, but doing your best isn't good enough when we have data to tell us how to do it better. And so what was really interesting, the two key policies and procedures that we are addressing, like I know they're working on today, is just, what is the general protocol for medical visits?
Mhm.
Do you come in once a week when you're establishing care? Do you come in once every 2 weeks?
Mhm.
If you're coming in once a month and we do a med change, is like, after a med change, do you now come in a week later, 2 weeks later? And allowing some discretion there. But oftentimes, like, we kind of like, I don't want to say we lose track of people or things, but like, if you don't follow up, it's like, if you don't follow up with your primary care, they're not going to like call you to make an appointment.
Right.
Some do, but a lot of them don't. They're just dealing with who's signing up.
Yeah.
um but like, for us, we know that's not good enough, like, and they're under our care, and we take that very seriously. So the first thing was like establishing like a general baseline for what do we train a provider who's joining our organization on, in terms
Mhm.
of like, how frequently are they seeing their patients? Because someone who's worked, like recently, we have a new provider that worked in the VA, and due to their authorizations or something, like they couldn't see patients more than once a month at like this outpatient level of care. So she came in here and she was scheduling follow-ups like a month out, whereas, she just did a med change and we would want to see that a week or 2 weeks out. But we didn't have that policy to just say, hey, this is how we do it. And she's like, oh, that's awesome. We can do this.
Right. This is why I wanted to come here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's one piece that we're still kind of working on. But the other piece is like once someone has established care with us, like we need to either make sure that they're getting treatment on the right cadence for, what's going on with them. And if they're no longer receiving treatment from us, we need to make sure to appropriately discharge them. Because like if something goes wrong, like let's say, we have a patient who, kills themselves or gets in a car wreck, a drunk driving accident, like they're going to look into were they being treated, who is treating them.
Right.
And we could get called into court to testify, all sorts of things. So we don't want to have a lot of like quote dead weight on our caseload. And that's very important at the individual provider level for their license. And it's also very important for our for the patients to make sure that like we're following up appropriately. And then it's also like super helpful for admin to have like a repeatable process. It's not like, hey, we need to fill the schedule. Like how we need to fill the schedule can actually be dictated by patient care, and the data can drive how we're making those decisions. So we've got a report built, and we can, it's the caseload report, and really we can pull up the entire practice, which has like 3,000 total patients, or filter down to an individual provider level. And from that report, we can, if we click on Dr. O'Connor, we can see, okay, how many, and we can change the time frame. So we can say, okay, how many patients have you not seen in the last 90 days? And do they have and whether or not they have a follow-up appointment. So we can very quickly see for whatever time frame, whether or not they have been seen or have a follow-up appointment. And Dr. O'Connor yesterday, well, let me go back. So we have that whole system kind of mapped out. Like we've got the data, the report from the caseloads. But then we need to see like what are the goals for this report? Like what should this report say if we're doing everything well, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, what we said was basically 0% of your caseload should not have been seen in the last 190 days. And we used 190 because occasionally someone comes in twice a year, very rarely, but no one should come in less than every 6 months, period, in our practice. Then we said less than 5% should be haven't been seen in the last 90 days. And then we said 50% of a caseload should generally have been seen in the last 30 days. Also, we want to see from the overall caseload that 95% of someone's patients have a follow-up visit, right?
Right.
And so we had all that information. We have the report. We set those kind of, goal metrics in place. Then we just pulled up our best friend ChatGPT and said, hey, here are the goals. Here's what the report tells us. Build a policy and procedure that makes it easier for admin to reach out to schedule. So we end up with email templates, text templates, call scripts in 5 minutes. And then we take all of that, we send it to our practice manager in Chapel Hill, Lauren, and we go in with Dr. O'Connor. And we say, hey, these are, the goal is that, what we just articulated, 95% of your, patients have future appointments set. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure like 90 to 95% of mine have future appointments.
Right.
And I said, well, actually you have, 257 patients and 125 of them do not have a future appointment with you. And he's like, holy shit. And he's like, well, we need to fix that. And it was a nice thing because admin has clear goals in terms of like getting schedules filled, they now have a way to leverage a large data set to say, hey, here are the 50 people to reach out that have had a visit in the last month but don't have a follow-up. So we can send an email that says, hey, we've seen you recently at AIM, but we don't have a follow-up visit. We need to get that scheduled. Please do
Right.
so, by calling us or going online to this link, which will come soon. Or people who haven't been seen in the last 2 months. It's like, hey, we haven't seen you in a while, and we either need to get you rescheduled or we need to discharge you from our practice. If you choose to come back, you're welcome to. And now we have this process that our front desk, instead of calling individual people, emailing individual people for appointments, can go out and touch all of the patients that they need to at once, which greatly reduces the amount of time spent on these repetitive tasks.
Yeah. So for anybody that's listening or may not be tracking, or that stuff's not super fascinating to them, or they can't put together the so what on that, where my mind immediately goes to that is thinking about the user experience at something like Chick-fil-A, right? It's a very clearly like the infrastructure that they have, the data that they have, the metrics that they have allows their team to perform in a way that makes it a really, really good sort of seamless user experience, right? Like you show up, you know exactly how long they get an X amount of people through, they know how to do that. And it can feel like this sort of gross mechanistic sort of thing, I think, sometimes if you're just looking at it from the outside. But then when you're actually in the process of experiencing it, it was like, wait, this is great. I went from point A to point B seamlessly, right? I bounced all the way through this. I got what I wanted. This is why I was here in the first place. I now have a hot, delicious chicken sandwich, politics aside. But I think of this as is a somewhat similar sort of thing, right? Like how best care to me is how do you lower the barriers to engagement? Sometimes the barriers to engagement are just like these, like, I don't want to call a practice. I don't want to have to figure out when my next appointment is. I don't want to be the one that has to initiate that. I want to have as frictionless of an experience as possible. Well, the way to get to a frictionless experience is through using data to make funnels and user pathways through our system frictionless, right? Like, how do we change our behavior in response to the data and the stuff that we're starting to see? I think overall, the idea is like we marry operations, we marry marketing, we marry best practice. And when all of those things are humming along in this golden thread, it's everybody has a better experience, right? Like, that's what we want.
Well, and I think like there's totally, and I think there's often just so much like perceived conflict between departments. Whereas like if we pick again, like if patient care is the thing, and we can articulate our standards for that, then people can be aligned behind that because no one's waking up and being like, I want to get my utilization right. They wake up and they're like, I want to take care of my patients. And
Right.
if we can connect the dots between
Exactly. Yeah.
all of that, it just feels a lot better.
Yeah.
And it's, it's obviously better for liability. It just helps us get clear on what we're actually doing because, someone could say, well, I got 500 people on my caseload. And it's like, well, you probably shouldn't. Like, they need to be discharged. Like,
Right.
That's just liability that you're carrying.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I found it just super interesting and how, we've had a couple of these experiences more recently. I think the online scheduling, like there was so much pushback a year ago to the idea of patients scheduling themselves or, being able to be a, new patient and go straight to booking an appointment. And we've largely like overcome that. And I think we're going to be, going live with online scheduling in the next couple of weeks. And we've got all of these other kind of policies and processes to ensure that we're doing better patient care, which also puts us in a place to, be more financially sustainable. And then I think the other piece that we didn't hit on is like that's a key number. Like what they're solving from the caseload management is like there's always going to be some amount of attrition. People come
Right.
and go, they move, they change providers, something happens. And, from your perspective, growth and getting more patients, it's like you need to know what our refill rate is just to keep the
Right.
practice full. And then as we're adding people or adding a line of service, we need to increase those numbers in order
Yeah.
to make up for that. And all of that stuff is constantly, kind of in flux and moving together. So at some
Hmm.
point I could see our, KPIs becoming a lot more dynamic based
Yeah.
on, hey, this is the attrition rate right now. It's 10% a year. So in order to do that, we need uh, 300 new patients a year. Well, that's, less than 20 a month or
Yeah.
whatever. And then if we're going to build or grow anymore, we obviously know we need more than that. So,
Right. Yeah, and I think what's interesting, and I know we're kind of wrapping up on time, but where my head went last night when we were talking about this was I think oftentimes the strategy that gets proposed is, well, let's just get more leads, right? And so that leads people to hire these digital marketing firms, that leads them to throw these sort of like grunt level, just grind through sort of behaviors to try to just in a really like carpet bombing sort of way, like we're just going to get leads up, right? Well, then you're just in this really inefficient system that's going to burden everyone, not just providers, not just ops, not just, but it's going to pass the cost on to patients, right? If you're dropping $250,000-$300,000 on ad spends and digital marketing per year because you're trying to keep up with this unknown attrition rate, guess who pays for that, right? Like that's going like someone's going to pay for that, right? And so when all of this stuff works at a higher frequency and a like better, like more efficiency, everybody's going to have a better experience, not just us, but patients, providers, everything, right? And that's ultimately kind of the perspectives for us. Ultimately, as an organization, is how do we align all of these things so that we can show that this is a way of doing care, a better model of doing care
yeah,
for everyone, right?
totally. Last thing on total sidebar in terms
Yeah.
of what we've been talking about, but I wanted to bring up in the spirit of open source health, something that I find like super super important because I've complained in the past that pricing data is like impossible to get from insurance companies,
Yeah.
and you can't know what what your competitors or what other people's rates are, but it was brought to my attention there was something passed a couple of years ago called the Transparency in Coverage Rule that requires all insurance providers to disclose machine readable files that contain all of the pricing data. So all of the in-network rates and all of the allowed amounts and historical billed charges for out-of-network rates. So now you can see, and my understanding is this is going to go down to the zip code level.
Oh
And
wow.
so you can see by zip code what the reimbursement rates are. But it's incredibly difficult. Like you have
Mhm.
to do, you've got to do custom coding. I mean, you got to build this out. But if we do that, one of my goals is to kind of build this nationwide heat map that you could look at and you could see where the best reimbursement rates are for therapy, for psychiatry, for TMS, et cetera. Or at least, for people who are asking like, should I go in network, or like, isn't it better to be out of network when I get paid a lot more? It's like, well, we can just answer that question as opposed to like speculate. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that one. It doesn't necessarily play, a ton into our strategy right now, but it's going to be very helpful for a lot of people, and it's going to help us, like if we're going to expand into a new area, to understand if our requests are reasonable or not.
Yeah.
So
All right.
anyway, yeah, got to move on, but it was a fun week.
Yeah.
Fun week.
That's a word for it.
All right. I'll
Yeah.
see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.